you can see from the slide that's up, Dr. Cunningham has such an impressive background, again, as the founder of Cunningham Graphics International. It was listed on NASDAQ, one of the largest printing companies, according to the Wall Street Journal, and he sold that to Automatic Data Processing, or ADP, in 2000. And then additionally, we've got, he has a number of achievements, including being the Chancellor of National University System. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off share, and we're going to go into gallery mode, so you'll get a chance to see Dr. Cunningham live and in person as we conduct our interview. So I'm going to stop sharing and share my video, and I'm going to put us in gallery mode, and then Leona and Chris, you guys are going to go off that. There's Dr. Cunningham. Good to see you.
Hello, everyone.
And then I'm going to put us in, let's see the thing to be able to put us in gallery mode. But you guys are going to stop sharing your screen, Leona and...
Yep. There's no more sharing, so it's just you two right now.
Okay. All
Unless
right.
you want everybody on video.
No. I was going to say, go ahead and take them off video.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start our interview. You'll see a poll that'll come up that'll ask you some questions about the 3 key topics that we're going to cover with regards to the interview with Dr. Cunningham. We're going to cover in this session specifically 3 areas about your journey with growing your business, Cunningham International Graphics International, specifically in the area of growth of your business through acquisition, growth of your business internationally, and how you partnered with minority-led businesses to grow your business with top Fortune 500 companies. So let's first, and then we're going to get to your role with as far as the Chancellor at National University System a bit later. But first, I want to start with your entrepreneurial expertise to help our audience understand the significant nature that you've grew CGII and your role there. So let's start there. Can you share with our audience a bit about CGII's nature of the business? And you even have a Fireside in the back.
Well, so. I'll tell you, it's one of the hottest days here in San Diego, but Kim, you wanted a fireside chat, so I put my fireplace on. So
wow, I'm impressed.
If you see me sweating a little, that's why. So
I am impressed.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, and I know that many of you want to watch the Democratic National Convention that's on right now, so I'll try to make this quick. First of all, I'd like to thank Founders First and Kim Folson specifically for having me here today, but even more importantly, Kim has been such a integral part of my higher education career. She was on my board at San Diego State Business School when I was dean there, and she's on my board right now at the National University System. And the lens that Kim gives us in the organizations and the vision and the strategy has just been exceptional. So Kim, I just want to say thank you very much. And, you know, I hope all the organizations that you coach and fund realize that you're dealing with someone very special. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. And, you know, so can you share with us, if you were to describe the solutions that CGII brought to the market?
Sure. Basically what happened, I started out as a printing sales guy. I started at 21 years old selling fixed income and equity research reports on Wall Street for another printing company. And since Wall Street was the biggest market in the financial services industry, that was a good place to start. And so basically I was selling to companies like Goldman Sachs, Prudential, and I built up a pretty good book of business, around $11 million worth of business a year. And for a young guy, that was a pretty good deal. I wasn't looking to go into business. But then one of the companies, I was repping 2 companies. One of the companies had some hard times. personal hard times with the founder. So I wound up breaking away and starting my own business, Cunningham Graphics. And so that really set me off as a business person, and I retained most of my customers. And I had some money in the bank from my commissions and sales. But what I found, one of the biggest sources of funding for me happened to be vendors. So paper vendors, machine vendors. I bought printing presses. My first printing press was $17,871 a month.
Wow,
And
that's a
that was
lot.
a lot of money. I started with 10 folks and, pressmen and bindery folks in a small factory, 10,000 square foot factory in Jersey City, New Jersey. And then we had to deliver. So the first big lesson is, you can have all the growth plans in the world, but unless you deliver day in and day out for your customers, it's all for naught. So that's the most important thing, satisfying the customer's needs. So I grew the business, and it was a traditional printing business, analog business. And then there was a defining moment that happened in my life. And by the way, during this time, I went back to school to get my master's at NYU in graphic communications management and technology. Later on, I went there for my doctorate. And it's no mistake that I'm leading a university now in a university system. And the reason I'm doing this is because education, post-secondary education, had such an important part of my success in my life. And you'll see that during my story. I wanted to go back and give back and create those opportunities for students so that they can succeed also. So that's how I got back into higher education. So just a little thing there. But anyway, so I was running a successful small printing company. We built around $60 million. Again, mostly regional in the New York City area and for Wall Street firms. And we actually were the largest in the world for that type of printing, research report printing. And then there was something happening in the world around 1995. And what was happening was that globalization, there were four macro trends. I always look at macro trends to see where the future is going to be. And you all heard the Gretzky quote, skate where the puck will be.
Right.
So you look at macro trends. So there were four macro trends that were happening around the mid-90s. The first one was outsourcing. That was a big one, and that stick to your knitting companies that had other businesses within their businesses that wasn't core, they would look to outsource. So that was number one. Number two was consolidation. You had a lot in any fragmented market, and the printing industry was like many other mom and pop, highly fragmented industries, that there was a lot of efficiencies to be gleaned by consolidation within those industries. Think about Best Buy, think about waste management. These were organizations that really took over an industry that was mom and pop, and they consolidated that industry. The other thing was globalization. Okay, globalization. There was a lot of mergers happening throughout the world, and folks wanted to deal with companies that could facilitate their needs on an international basis. So they didn't want to work with 50 different vendors around the world. They wanted to work one or two larger vendors that could service their needs around the world. But the most important thing that happened around that time was a huge paradigm shift. And that was from analog to digital technology. Mm-hmm. Huge paradigm shift. I call it, basically, it was a term coined out of biology, and that's called punctuated equilibrium. Now, Michael Porter used that term when it came to business later on. And that's when there's a massive shock to the status or the static nature of any industry, a massive shock. And that could be caused by innovation. It could be caused by regulation. It could be caused by a pandemic, which we're seeing right now. Right. That's a magic shock to the status quo, if you will. So whenever that happens, there's opportunities that happen. So what happened in our industry was it shifted from analog to digital. And you had all the big printers, R.R. Donnelley, World Press, these huge, big global printers, but they were all analog. So we were able to take advantage of the switch to the digital technology, and instead of print and distribute, we actually distributed and print. So we partnered with folks around the country, around the world, sent them electronic files and printed locally in those regions. So that basically we formed what was called World Research Link. And that was our differentiating factor. So instead of printing and then internationally shipping around the world, we would actually print in the local regions through partnerships and get it there the same day. Instead of 2 days to London, 3 days to Hong Kong, 4 days to Tokyo, we could get same day distribution and eliminate the shipping cost. So that was the big thing. That was the big secret sauce that enabled us to actually grow the company and take it public.
So that was amazing. let me break down a few elements of what you shared in that piece. So you started this by acquiring some of your customers, right? And then when you started it in the 80s though, right?
Yeah, we started in 1989, May 5th, 1989. You know, for those of you that have went through starting a business, I was literally in the fetus position in my bed with the covers over my head because I was supposed to be at the lawyer's office to sign all the paperwork to start my business. And I just got cold feet. I just said, I can't go through with this. I'm risking everything I have to start this business. So my wife at the time said to me, stop being a baby, get out of bed, you can do this. So that's what got me out of bed and went to the lawyer's office and started the business.
But that is just amazing, because one of the strategies that we want to talk about is, as opposed to starting organic, you went through, you acquired them, and that gave you a baseline of some business to build upon, right?
Yeah, well, what happened was I had my own book of business. So as I mentioned, I was in sales. So I had a really good book of business to start. Mm-hmm. And then being through trade associations, getting to know folks in my industry. That's a key thing too. Get involved with your industry. Know the other players in your industry. And then if you develop a reputation of trust, of success, people will come to you and want to work with you. So that was number one that happened. The other thing, if you remember, I talked about one of the mega trends that was happening, or the macro trends, was outsourcing. So I went to all the customers I had. They had their own in-house print shops. Merrill Lynch had a $20 million print shop in Piscataway, New Jersey. Goldman Sachs had a $15 million print shop right in 8th Avenue in Manhattan. So I put out a sheet together and I said, okay, we'll take over in-house print shops. They have to be in the criteria was top 20 financial services company. They had to give us a long-term contract to take over the business. We gave them preferential treatment with pricing. And the secret was, because we knew they all cared about their employees, we guaranteed employment for at least 85% of their employees once we took over.
Oh,
the last thing was we were also had to get an in-contract writing that over a period of 6 months, we can move out of their internal facility and move it into one of our major factories. Okay. That was key because efficiencies were key.
Okay. And then,
we did 9 of them.
So you acquired these, took over the print shops that were internal to those, and had some, basically the contracts to do the service. And I can remember, so the dates that you're talking about are so important to me, because like in 1995 is when I started my first business. And when you talked about some of the global trends, the 4 global trends, how did you keep up to date with those? What was your?
Well, that's a great question. And the secret was, and that's why I paid homage, if you will, to higher education, post-secondary education. Lifelong learning is very important. When I reached around 60 million in sales, that was my plateau. Technology was changing. I went back to school for my master's, and working with the professors at NYU, working with my fellow classmates, working with the industry experts, the adjunct professors that were from industry. That's why I love National University so much. The majority of our professors are actually in the industry, whether it's education, whether it's business, whether it's cybersecurity. They're in the industry, they're experts, they're creating the future of that industry. And learning from folks like that gave me as a matter of fact, when I was in class, in a master's class, the whole term terabyte just came out. Remember, a terabyte was a huge bunch of data, right? That no one even thought would be possible. But I learned that in the classroom. So we actually learned things in the classroom that I applied right away into the business world. So I can't overemphasize the importance of education in the growth of my company.
So that gave that additional learning gave you increased your leadership capacity and ability to strategize around other opportunities with regards that you could capitalize in your business.
And Kim, one other little benefit was also I got the pick of the crop out of all the students in the classroom, the best and the brightest students. I hired them.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that was another benefit to going back to school and being involved in that arena.
So with your business, you started it in '89.
Yeah.
And then when did you start the strategy as far as doing the acquisitions? Because you acquired some 18 different organizations.
Yeah, I did. We did 9 acquisitions from in-house print shops that were all in the top 20 financial services groups. And most of them were international. So that helped me internationally too.
Mhm.
And then we did 9 acquisitions. My criteria for the acquisitions was mostly of a geographic one, in that we wanted to expand our footprint geographically, but we wanted to do it with known brands that had books of business and great reputations also. So basically that was what we did. We took the company public on those 4 things: the outsourcing, globalization, using our technology, and also consolidation, doing acquisitions. Our criteria was $5 to $15 million, $5 to $20 million, have above market profitability, have a very good second tier management team. The top management team, we love for them to stay with us, but many of them wouldn't, because they got a big payday. But we wanted the second management and having something different, whether it's a technology that we could scale across all of our other plants. So at the end of the day, we wound up with 9 factories in 6 different countries. And that was the fabric of Cunningham Graphics International.
When you started CGII, was it mostly a US-based organization, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And since there were 3 major, there's more than that now, but basically 4 major financial markets, and we all know who they are, right? You have Wall Street, you have London, you have Hong Kong, you have Tokyo, you have Germany. Those are key. So we figured if we could capture at least 4 out of those 5 top markets and acquire the companies that were leading in the space where we were and partner with them, that would be the success. And that was the way we, I'll tell you a quick story. It was survival that really was the mother of this executed strategy, in that one of our top clients was First Boston out of New York. They had just been acquired by Credit Suisse. So it's now Credit Suisse First Boston. Mm-hmm. Credit Suisse First Boston wanted to use global printers. We weren't global. My customer came to me, Peg File, and she said, Mike, we love you guys. You're doing a great job, but they want to use a global printer and they want to switch to R.R. Donnelley. And I said, Peg, can you give me 2 months? I'll put a plan together. And she said, I'll give you 1 month. That's when I got on a plane. I flew to Hong Kong. I flew to London. I flew to Tokyo. I met with the companies that did what we did in Wall Street. And then on a handshake, we said, this is survival, or else Donnelley's going to come eat our lunch. Let's act as one company. Let's do quality control the same way. Let's do our print and distribute, the World Research Link technology. I talked about it. And everyone keeps their profitabilities in their region. It wasn't about I was going to ask for some of their profits. It worked out so successful. When we took the company public, we wound up buying all those partners.
Wow, that's just amazing. From so many different aspects. So let's talk about the financing strategy that you utilized before you were able to take the company public, because just as you said, you acquired 18 organizations. You started it with your own, commissions, earnings but how did you go through, like if you were to talk about the different stages of the company, beyond your own initial, money that you brought to the table, what were some of your funding strategies that you used for growth?
I'll tell you a very interesting one. And I remember that day, May 5th, 1989. Well, we all know what happened in 91. We had what was first, a pretty severe recession that was happening in 91. And the financial markets, basically, we lost half of our business. We didn't lose one customer, but we lost half of the business, right? Because financial markets were getting crushed at that time. Mm-hmm. So we had a lot of savings in the bank, and we were going forward. And there was a time our payroll got to be around $1 million a week, and that was before we went public. And there was a question of going, all right, it's right around the time we went public, and you can go broke pretty quickly with $1 million a week payroll. And then through industry relationships, there were 2 guys that I knew that were top sales guys that did complementary business to what we did. See, part of our strategy too, all our business was research reports. We get at 8 o'clock at night, we deliver them at 8 o'clock in the morning. So you had 2 shifts worth of empty factory, if you will, but the night business paid for it all. So I knew if I could get these 2 guys in, they could bring in business to fill in those first 2 shifts, and would make all the business more profitable. So what I did is I sold them 10% of the company just to bring their business over. So I sold 10% for $300,000. They gave us the needed cash that we needed to keep the business going. And I always say 90% of something is worth a lot more than 100% of nothing. So I sold 10% of the company, but that let us live another day, and then the markets turned and we made it through.
Well, so thanks so much for sharing that. You know, did you use any other like debt or equity
Yeah.
financing before that?
Yeah, not so much on the equity financing, but we actually used what we were calling mezzanine level debt, and it was middle market debt, and it was actually out of Fidelity Bank. There was a bank called Fidelity there that got taken over later, and that was fine. It was a little expensive money, but it was really good because if you're a small cap and we wanted to take the company public. To do that, you have to grow revenues at least 20%, and you have to grow your EPS at least 30% a year, and that takes a lot of capital to actually keep that going.
Right.
So we borrowed some mezzanine level debt, and it wasn't senior, but it was right in the middle there. But then there came a time when a lot of the banks didn't want to deal in middle market anymore.
Right.
So the bank said, you have 90 days to give us our money back, type of thing. So that got a little scary, but since I had all these financial service customers, and I went to Goldman Sachs and we had a great relationship. I went to one of the partners at Goldman Sachs and I said, listen, I go, my cost of capital is much higher than yours. I said, if you front the money for us for working capital, I can split the difference with you on that cost of capital. And they said, fine. So the next day they wrote me a check for $1 million.
Wow.
So that was another bridge thing. The big story is, any port in a storm, as long as it's ethical, it's moral, survival, you have to be in it to win it. So those were the type of things. And you know what a great feeling it was to have a customer, step up to the plate and say, here, Mike, we'll help fund your growth.
So when you launched CGII, did you have a plan of taking it public?
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, we talk a lot about exit strategies and what your exit strategy is. I never had an exit strategy. I built this business to run it, and I love the business. I love selling printing. At night I would work production. So I didn't go in there and say, hey, of course I want to make money. I want to be successful, but it wasn't like I want to exit for a big, price tag. That eventually happened. But But it was funny. I used to jog a lot, and those of you who jog out there, your mind just wanders. And because what I was doing every day was printing research reports that were talking about public companies, I visualized the name of my company on one of those publicly traded research reports, and that was the visualization I had. I mean, I literally got into the numbers. I could see it, and that kept me going, and that helped lead the way to make it become a reality.
Wow, that's great. And even when you look at, first starting about one of the topics is acquisition. When you looked at acquiring companies, you talked about one criteria was the top, you looked at their financials and all of those other things. But acquisitions are so much about relationships, and so many acquisitions don't work. And, and many times for a small and medium-sized business, that can be just the death knell. What strategy did you use, from a relationship or a people standpoint to be able to figure out that this was a good match and not? And then the second is, of those, you did 18, how many did you look at and you said, you know what, I'm going to pass? And, so can you take us through the acquisition piece?
Sure. Of course you have to do your regular due diligence, okay? Your financial due diligence, your operational due diligence, your human resources due diligence. You got to do all that. But the big thing that was for me, there were two things, and this sounds crazy. There are two things that I used to base the decision on, besides all of the other stuff. The other stuff didn't pan out, then it was a no-go anyway. Number one, whenever I had a meeting with the principals of the organization, I used to watch how they walked towards my office. I had a corner office. And, just like anything, you got cameras up and down the hallway. I used to watch how they walked. And if there was a sense of urgency to their walk, if there was like an excitement in their walk, I said, you know what? That's half of the battle right there. It wasn't like, it was just, an easy pace. So that's number one. I know it sounds crazy, whatever. But the real important thing was what I called the what if meeting. We'd have a what if meeting that would say, okay, we're going to think about everything that could go wrong and right with this business. And how are we going to handle it? If we need more money, if we need dry powder to grow this business, do you have the dry powder, and are you going to be willing to put it up? And went through everything, even personal relationships. Let's say, my family doesn't get along with your families. Our wives hate each other. Whatever it could be, what's it going to, how are we going to solve that? And just by talking, and it would be a weekend, it'd be a what if meeting, it'd be a weekend long. The principals would just get together and everything was on the table. Everything. What happens if you did something unethical? What happened if you did something illegal? What happened, whatever it was, you lost all of your business and it affected our business. Those type of things. What happens if you got involved with drugs, right? What happens if you got involved with drugs? We would talk about all these things. From those meetings, I would be able to tell, and they would be able to tell if there was a match there. If we thought ethically together, if we had the same moral compass, if we had empathy, you know, those type of things. And if you had the finances in the bank and you were willing to step up in hard times, that was important. So out of the 18, we saw hundreds, if not 1,000 different organizations. And remember, these weren't huge acquisitions. One we did was 40 million. The rest were under 20 million. And the 9 that we did for the outsourcing, there was no money outlaid for that. We didn't pay anything for that. We got long-term contracts. So, but out of that, I think there were probably around 4 to 6 that we just walked away from after those meetings.
Very insightful. Where did you learn that strategy?
I don't know. It just happened.
Wow, that's very insightful, because it is so much about people, you know, and it's, as I can remember, one of the investors that I had, they used to say that, you know, when you're going through a transaction, you know, it's really like dating somebody, and, you know, and that you really don't know what it's going to be like being married to them until after the transaction occurs. And too often people don't go through and talk about, you know, what it's like after that process. And so that gives you some type of insight with regards to that. And it can be hard. I mean, how do you have to build up a very trusting relationship with someone to say, hey, we're gonna need to have this what if meeting so that we can understand how we're gonna go through hard times together.
And I think another important thing is you take that, and then when you go international, you times that by 10. Because one of the things that you have to overcome when you're dealing in the international market is that they've all seen the rich American coming over them, promising them the world, and then not being there the next day. Mm-hmm. It's happened over and over and over again. So those relationships with those other folks, they didn't start when I, you know, just flew over there and said, hey, let's partner. We had a relationship for years before that because we were serving a common client and clients. So Shearson Lehman Brothers and Credit Suisse and Goldman, they're all international firms. So we're doing part of their business. These guys were doing other parts. So we got to know each other, know about the standards, know about that, so that when we went over there, it was just, you can trust me. And we shook hands. There was not one document before we actually bought them. We partnered for, I don't know, 2 years and did a lot of business with those firms just on a handshake. And I was really proud of that.
Well, that's really important, because the other side of it is that with each of those other countries, there's other cultural differences. But then the other thing that you brought up that I thought was really important was the fact that, you know, you ultimately acquired these companies, but you had a shared experience in servicing the same customer. I did 3 acquisitions, or sold 3 of my companies. And all the people I sold to were people that I had done business with for a couple years. This perception that, you know, you're just going to find somebody and out of the blue, it's going to be like, you know, love overnight, that you're just going to, you know, love at first sight. That's what it is. That you're just going to meet somebody and boom, they're going to acquire your company. And that your story shares that it took a while to develop that level of trust.
Yeah. And there was something else, Kim, that's tangentially related. Besides just increasing on the efficiency through technology, the partnerships, we bought all private companies, and even the outsourcing. These were, you know, basically, for all intents and purposes, they're not publicly traded, right? So back in the day, now it's a little closer, but back in the day, you could have, let's say, a 10-time multiple on a private company, and the public companies were trading at 15 times multiple. So as being a public company, when I did these acquisitions, for the same amount of earnings per share, I was getting a 5% arbitrage on their earnings. With the same, without increasing the efficiency of the business. That was just from day one. So that really helped our value of our stock go up significantly. Now it's a little different. The private equity money is on par with public money right now. So there's not a lot of arbitrage between the two.
Is there still that opportunity, you know, when you look at the path you went through with going public, a company that's doing, you know, I'm not certain where you were as far as your revenue growth, but if you were, say, you know, a $50 million company or a $100 million company, is there still that opportunity to take a company like that public, provided that they have the appropriate, you know, growth trajectory?
Well, you know, if you're a tech company, yes, you know, and but the funny story is that I went to one of my biggest customers at the time, Merrill Lynch, and I asked them, I said, listen, I'd like you to take me public. And I was doing, like I said, around 50, 60 million in business. And basically they laughed at me and they said, hey, Mike, when you grow up, you come back to us and we'll take you public. So that was it. But then I thought about, you know what, the number one analyst in the space, and it was a tech computer space, was out of Prudential. And they have institutional investor is how they rate all these analysts. The number one guy, I've been printing his research for years and years and years, and Alex Henderson was his name. So I called up Alex and I said, Alex, you think you guys, you know, would take us public? I said, listen, we won't be on the left of the book, meaning we won't take you public, but we'll be on the right of the book. We'll support the offering. You just got to find someone to be on the left. So I was telling my neighbor who happened to work for Schroders, a big European bank, and he was the head of their research, and we had a beach home, and I was talking to him. He goes, I'll take you public. And I said, okay. And then 6 months later, we were public. So,
Wow.
So I wish I could say I really planned everything and it worked out like I, you know, something that, you know, again, relationships mean a lot.
And when you started out, you talked about you were an analog company, and then eventually you became a digital, as I shared in promotion of this event, that you were a tech-enabled company by the time you were public. How was that transition, and what did you have to do to retool your company to be that, you know, tech-enabled, you know, service-based business?
Well, it's all about hiring the right team and the right people. All about that, because, you know, I told you, I was just learning about what a terabyte meant when you had a lot of these tech gurus that really knew, you know, computers. They knew about digital communications. Now, bear in mind, you guys would all go crazy if you had a deal now. What we're dealing then, it was ISDN lines. That's what we were using. And to do tabular format materials sent over ISDN lines, an 8-pager of tabular format could take up to 2 hours to transmit.
Wow.
So, I mean, and you had to make sure, did the wires go down? What was the proofreading like on both sides? You know, so fax machines were still using that roll paper. So it was a long time ago.
Oh, I know. I mean, in those days, our solution, my first company, we were a Netflix of educating doctors for continuing ed. And some of them had invested in, you know, ISDN lines. A lot of them were using 56K. So believe me, I so understand what that was like. So going through, again, back to your international expansion, to be able to, you went back and said that, you know, with the Credit Suisse First Boston, how long, you know, you said, you know, you asked for 2 months, she said you give you a month. How long did it take to get, you know, your solution up to start servicing?
Well, no, basically 4 months. And it wasn't like she just said, okay, we'll go with you guys. We had it was a huge RFP that went out. And the RFP involved R.R. Donnelley, Xerox, XBS, Xerox Business Unit, Pitney Bowes, and another company that's a large public company now called Williams Lee, and they were based out of London. And it was a head-to-head battle to get that business, but at the end of the day, we got it. I knew, see, here's one of the key things. It was survival. I knew if we lost Credit Suisse First Boston, that we would lose our other customers, because not only the financial services sector, but many sectors, they follow each other.
Right.
You know, what's in that New York Times on that Sunday afternoon, and what is the trend in that industry? And if we lost one, there would be a domino effect. However, if we knew if we won this, we'd start winning a lot more business, and that's what happened.
Wow, that's amazing. That is amazing. So we're going to ask about, so you basically adjust your vision, some based on, you talked about the 4 mega trends, some based on your customers' feedback, as well as, you know, being able to go through and take the company public gave you capital to support your international strategy. And then you talked about after you launched it, 2 years after that, you ended up acquiring those businesses. So when you think about this, you know, what was the biggest challenge that you encountered with your overall growth strategy when you think about, you know, CGII?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was probably that having that contingency plan when you run out of money and you didn't do anything wrong. You know, so many companies are going through that right now, right? They had a great business model, and then COVID comes and they get, you know, knocked down and almost knocked out. And that's what happened in '91 to us. So that was like the biggest challenge. The other thing was you got to a point that I used to have lines down my door. I mean, there would always be lines of people asking me what to do. And I developed a culture of that until I realized that hiring the right people and trusting them and challenging them, and, you know, so those lines go away in front of your office, but things are happening better than they did when you were doing every day-to-day decision. That was the critical part. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to let go. It's hard to, you know, team and trust. It's so very important. So hiring the right people, supporting them. One of the key things with us was, you know, sometimes we didn't even have a position open and we would hire great talent, because great talent doesn't come around all the time. And you can always make a position, and that person, whatever the position is, will excel if it's that person's that good. So, you know, that's what we're doing at the National University System. We're making sure that we have great talent, and we're empowering them, and we're supporting them with resources that they need to make sure that we'll succeed and thrive in the future.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Key also with your growth strategy was partnerships and relationships. Now, you happen to have the great skill of sales and marketing and business development, but for some of our audience, what, you know, key advice would you give with regards to developing some of these key partnership relationships?
I mean, again, it's, you know, being a role model, being trustworthy, just doing what you say you're going to do. And that could be, hey, I'll call you in 5 minutes. You're talking to whether it's an employee of yours, you have a meeting at 5 o'clock, to be there at 5. And that was really tough for me, not to be late for meetings, but really respecting other people's time, calling partners when you say you're going to call them, delivering when you say you can do it. So that's built, that trust is built over a period of time. So that's very important. And the other thing, it's got to be a win-win situation. It's got to be flexible. It's got to be, you know, like I did with my brothers. You know, we had devil dogs back on the East Coast, and we were splitting one. One would do the split, and the other would get to pick which half they wanted. You know, it's just like that. Because if you're splitting it, the other one gets to pick it. That's a trustworthy, fair relationship. So when you make deals and arrangements that it's a win-win, truly a win-win, then you'll develop trust with other partners, and you know, so that's a key. So it is all about relationships for sure.
One more question with regards to partnerships in this, you know, COVID-19 time where companies are pivoting and having to look at new business lines that they weren't in before. What advice might you give them as far as being able to strike up net new relationships with people that they may not have had any pre-existing relationship with?
Well, I think a key thing, number one, is you got to look at your core competencies, right? What are you good at? And it might not be what you market around. So you might have a very successful business, but one of your core competencies might be recruiting and growing and incentivizing talent. One of your top competencies might be on the sales and marketing side. One of your top, you know, there's a bunch of different things. And then you say, okay, how do you apply those core competencies to another sector, another industry, another business line, another channel, with a chance of succeeding and partnering with folks? You might have cash, someone else doesn't have cash. They have a line that you could you partner with. So you got to do more with less. So just keep being open to the competencies and not so much the product itself or the service. What are your competencies?
Okay, so let's shift gears and let's talk a little bit about how you and CGII's strategy of partnering with minority businesses to help attract and support new large business. Can you talk a little bit about that strategy you utilized?
Yeah, and you know what, that was really a unintended benefit of the growth of the company. And in the mid 90s, there was a phrase that was very on the top of everyone's mind that was running corporations. This is after they got out of that 91 recession. Things started happening good again. You know, the 2000 tech bubble didn't happen yet. So there was a run from 93 to 2000 where companies were succeeding, stock market was going well. You know, the industry was looking good. It was a good time. So that, you know, GDP was compounded average GDP at that time was 4.5% every year during those years. I mean, it was a really lofty, heavy time. So the new thing folks were focusing on was called the triple bottom line, saying there's got to be more than just profits, right? So the triple bottom line was social justice and you know, equity. It was environmental, and it was profit. So that was called the triple bottom line. So major corporations were really focusing on that. And diversity was a big part of that. Diversity and inclusion. Before the word inclusion was even invented in the way that we know it today. Mm-hmm. But it was diversity and having a diverse workforce. And during that time, there was a big thing about, should we have quotas? Should we not have quotas? And, you know, it was a really interesting time, not a great time when it came to that. So basically, there were incentives for organizations to hire diverse employees. And it was a big thing, not unlike what it now. And now it's like a whole different level. And I think we're at a very good point in our history right now, a much needed point to get to another level. But basically, the thing was, you had primary, secondary, and tertiary levels of hiring and promoting and employing. What do I mean by that? Merrill Lynch, for instance, we went to Merrill Lynch and said, we can help you out with this. You have a limited diverse workforce. We have a very diverse workforce. We use diverse contractors, and Merrill Lynch, for instance, would get credit for the diversity of our workforce, get credit for the vendors that we use if they were diverse. And they would get credit for their own diverse workforce, hiring and whatnot. And when I say credits, there were tax credits that were built into the tax code for this. And even more than that, there was a doing the right thing ethos that was happening in corporate America at that time. So it was so exciting because basically what we did is we went out and we interviewed a bunch of minority vendors, minority and women-owned companies. And many of them were mom and pops operating one shift. And basically, we put the resources forth, and we would guarantee them a certain amount of business that we would get from all these other corporate clients. And by the way, we got an incentive to do that because we could charge an extra 5% more than the competitive bids that would go out if we were sourcing this business to minority and women-owned businesses. So there was an incentive there, but it was also just the right thing to do. And we put in training programs that we help mom and pop organizations of diverse ownership and women ownership, the current state-of-the-art business practices, how to take it from one shift to 3 shifts, where to get financing, all this stuff. Because remember, a lot of this stuff was mom and pop. Right. You know, it's a small printer, a print shop, a digital copy center. And it was great. And we learned as much from them as they learned from us. And I'm happy to say that over 20 minority women-owned vendors actually more than quadrupled their business. Most of them are still around today doing some of them huge organizations. And because this ecosystem was put into place that incentivized training and sourcing and employing people of color and women-run companies. So excited. I learned a lot, and it's like deja vu happening all over again right now.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that. We pride ourselves in doing some of the similar training and assistance for, underrepresented businesses to be able to establish those relationships. But as you look at the discussions around, like you talked about, people had specific requirements to do this and where we are today. And, that was some 20 years ago, and practices.
Well, I think maybe more.
Yeah, practices changed since then. What would you say that we need to do, or if you were to advise other CEOs to go through and look at those types of opportunities to partner with.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I think it's such an important discussion and an important topic. I think the first thing, it has to become a top priority in the boardroom. Number one, end of story. Because this is not just checking a box. This is doing the right thing for the right reasons and making sure that we have a more inclusive, equitable society. And the way you do that is through education, is through, commerce, is through our NGOs and our governments. I mean, that's how we do that. My big caveat is, so it's got to be a priority. You have to allocate a certain amount of resources to it, ergo a priority. But the other thing is, it's got to become part of the culture of the organization. And basically, if you look at Edgar Schein, who's a seminal voice on culture, it's those basic shared assumptions that the organization believes and makes decisions on a day-to-day basis, not the artifacts that are hanging on the wall, not the customer comes first slogans. I mean, the basic shared assumptions. And unless you get to that point, it's not going to work. But the other thing is this, and this is what happened. You asked me the other day, I thought it was a great question. All these corporations had the triple bottom line. They were all gung-ho about it. What happened? The tech bubble in 2000 happened. So when things are frothy and people have money to support other things besides the bottom line, that's great. We'll do the right thing. But when that money runs out, it's all about the bottom line and survival. So that's what happened. So triple bottom line. Now you see it starting to come up a little bit, but with COVID and a bad economy, I'm fearful that the resources and the priorities will not be put forth that are needed to make sure that this movement we have going on now, this very positive movement, continues. And that it's got to be a cultural thing, and we have to make it a priority.
Yeah, and to be able to go through and see the overall economic benefit,
Yeah.
on the longer term, or much more permanent, as opposed to constantly going through this every 10-year dance that we go through today.
Agreed. And Kim, you're doing such a great part. I mean, the whole nature and direction of your business, and both from the nonprofit side on Founders First, and then what you're doing on the other side as far as funding all these companies, I think is tremendous. And again, I am thankful as a citizen for you, but as a friend, I am just overjoyed for you and the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. Well, let's continue on this path about your experience with CGII. When you think about if you had to do it over with CGII, what would you do differently?
Yeah, I don't think anything. I mean, it was much more than I ever thought it was going to be. I used to be a guy that used to think about commissions, and I was making 10% of commissions, and I told you I was selling around 11 million bucks at 23 years old. I mean, that was more money than I ever thought I could. My father was a New York City fireman. So was my grandfather, my great-grandfather. I mean, it was like, God, that was my perfect life. I didn't want to go into business. I did not have a vision of being a businessman and doing this. But then you heard, how I got into it. And then a light bulb went off and said, you know what? There's more than commissions. It's building equity in an organization. And when you build equity in an organization, then you can change your family's life and your society's life for generations to come. So there's that little switch, but it takes a lot of hard work, and it's a whole different mindset than, I used to say, all right, I want to buy a car, and that car was $30,000. All right, I have to sell $300,000 worth of printing to afford that car. That's the way my mind used to work, right? And then I've met you in the audience and thinking the same thing. You sell something, you get a commission. It's a whole different mindset, but I think it's definitely a step change.
And so you started the business in '89. You exited when?
2000, and I exited in June of 2000, and it was probably 3 weeks before the tech bubble went down. So wow. Timing is really important. And, the one thing I can tell you, I remember like we were small cap company. Anything under 2 billion bucks is market cap is what's called a small cap on Wall Street. And you're dealing with the same professionals, the same lawyers, the same accountants that are getting your deals done, investment bankers. My biggest job was to managing the professionals on the deal and making sure they had a sense of urgency to get this deal done. Because I knew if we didn't get this deal done, there could be problems. And at that time, the capital markets were starting to close. Before the equity markets, the debt markets were closing. And it was just a precursor saying, listen, if you didn't have access to debt, you weren't going to have access to capital, to equity capital a little bit later. And sure enough, it was a tech bubble. So if I would have waited 3 months later, I don't think it would have happened.
So how did you decide that you were going to exit the business?
Well, that was the main thing. I saw that. I mean, I saw that the capital markets were closing. The debt market was closing first. I told you a few years before, the mid-level banks, the banks wanted to get out of mid-market business. So the access to capital was tough. But also, remember that paradigm shift. Digitization and the way you rationalize it was, well, because of digitalization, the amount of information was out there was going to grow exponentially. So even if they print a smaller portion of that, the market's still going to grow. Now, when I started, or the mid of my business, the printing industry, the market was an $80 billion market, 80 billion bucks. Today, it's less than $40 billion. All right. So 20 years later, it's half the market that was there. We already saw the market starting to come down, and you see it even in higher education today. We had printers that would never get involved in our business, the rush printing, the down and dirty printing. They were doing auto catalogs, and they're doing magazines and newspapers. But then when the market gets constricted and there's less business, everyone starts dipping down into someone else's business. So you have competitors from folks that would never be competitors before. And now even in, you think about higher education, we get competitors from folks like LinkedIn, right? Mm-hmm. Whoever thought would LinkedIn be a university competitor, but they are. So that's, I saw that happening, and I saw that it was going to be tougher and tougher. And I put a book together to sell the company.
Wow. So let's transition to, from the, Mike Cunningham, the business guy, to now Mike Cunningham, the Chancellor of National University System. Some of you have heard about, the acquisitions and those strategies that you've gone through, but also, and as part of the National University System, has gone through several acquisitions. There's also an international component. How have you leveraged your business acumen from running CGII for 20 some odd years to the strategy at National University Systems?
Well, I think there's a lot of similarities. I've learned more than I think I learned more than the amount of things I can apply, and I thought we applied a lot. And what do I mean by that? My training ground at San Diego State was important. I was teaching at NYU, and then I was teaching Cal Poly, and then I went to San Diego State. I was teaching there before I became dean. And one thing I realized at San Diego State, in order to affect change, you had to relate with faculty because it's their world. It is their world. And so that was a big learning for me. That's what I meant by I learned so much. So, but you have to do that. So when I learned that I had to relate and communicate, I could still apply business practices, but I had to do it in the context of shared governance and a context of getting buy-in. Mm-hmm. And then, so once you learn that, and that's about developing trust again. Once you have the trust, you go out there and we're able to do great things. And there's always a lot of friction because there's always some people that, people like to say no just because that's what they think they're supposed to say, right? So it's like friction. But we accomplished, and Kim, we accomplished so much at San Diego State. So when the opportunity came over at National, I thought we had more of a blank slate in that we didn't have tenured faculty. And we had a faculty that were practitioners for the most part. Now we still have shared governance and some things, but it was a great opportunity to really take business processes and practices and really work with a board that was supportive on saying, we know we have to change if we're going to succeed in the next 100 years. And that's what we are. I would say we're in the 6.5 inning of a transformation at the National University System that we will emerge a leader in post-secondary education with a new faculty model, with a new delivery model, and the efficacy of our programs for our students will be aided by technology. And we will go where no man's gone before. What was that, Star Wars or Star Trek? Yeah.
Star Trek. So when you think about what's happened within US, you guys recently announced a new JEDI initiative, Justice,
Sure.
Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and having been your experience in CGII, as well as what's happening right now with the whole, COVID-19, the Black Lives Matter movement and so forth, how do you see the, in US leveraging its position as the largest conferrer of degrees to folks of color in one of the largest in the state of California, being able to leverage that initiative?
Well, you know what? I'll just give a little bit of a history, Kim, and you know this history. Our JEDI movement was not started in the wake of the very unfortunate and horrible murder of George Floyd. It was started way before that. And I realized, and we realized, and some of the board members realized, we had an issue at National University System. And the issue was we had a hard time attracting and retaining and promoting quality women in the organization for some reason. And the board charged me to say, Mike, what's going on? I want you to lead an effort. I said, I am not the guy to lead that effort because I am sure I have cognitive biases of my own that I don't know about. I don't know. I know we have in-groups and out-groups. We have to acknowledge that. But we need professional help that's going to come in and really start this process on making sure that we are gender neutral, we are ethnic neutral, we are socioeconomic neutral, and that everyone has an opportunity. Because when we get to that point and we have all those different lenses and opinions, and our fabric is a more unified, inclusive fabric, our organization is going to be so much better, so much more growth oriented, and so much more fulfilling, and the efficacy of programs is going to be that much better. But we're not there yet. So along this journey, then again, the unfortunate murder of George Floyd happened. And then we said, we have to make it more. It was an EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion movement. And then we decided, let's put a social justice component on it. Went to the board right away. We had a quality, we have a quality gentleman in the organization that Tom Stewart, that is the interim president of one of our universities, John F. Kennedy University, Harvard-trained PhD, involved in Oakland and equity and diversity issues in a big way, including in the prison systems. So asked him if he wanted to step up, and he was overjoyed. So he said, only if I have the resources, only if it's a priority, and only if we're really serious about this, from the top of the board down to the folks that sweep the hallways. We all have to be involved, and that's where we are today. So we went out and we hired a few consultants to help put the 100-day plan together, and a mission and a charter for our JEDI initiative, and it's one of the top priorities in the organization. And we've also written to all faculty, staff, alumni, vendors, and asked them for their input. We have a lot of volunteers. So it's not only on, and this is what the key thing is about JEDI with us. It's not only who we hire and promote, all right? That's a ticket to the dance. It's who we do business with. It's what we teach, how we teach it, how much advocacy do we do. Those are getting deep. Who we invest with, where do we spend our money on our endowments and our cash surpluses? It's a whole inclusive type of a picture. It's not just making sure that we're an equal opportunity employer. It goes well beyond that. Because, I will admit, I have white privilege that I never knew, I just do. I don't know what I don't know. So I acknowledge that. We have to make sure that we do whatever we can to make sure that we have a level playing field.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that. And I'm so excited about this new initiative and look forward to the impact that it's going to have on the university. So as a business owner, how have you leveraged your legacy with regards to the business to have an impact? You personally, you've talked about what you're doing with the JEDI initiative to the university, but Mike Cunningham, how are you leveraging that journey?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think first and foremost, and we're going full circle, I got involved in higher education to make a difference. I explained how it made a difference in my life, my family's life for generations to come. First time going to college, you know, in my family. So I'm really excited about that. So that's the first thing. I said, I got to get back into it so I can open up doors, just like those before me open up doors for me. So that was number one. I think through philanthropy, I think it's very important. I've been very philanthropic over, quietly philanthropic, but very philanthropic to causes that mean a lot to me and my family. And my children have been very philanthropic. Those of you that are doing succession planning, one of the best things that I ever did is when I was a private company, there was a time it was $20,000 a year, $10,000 per spouse. You could donate up to your children. So we did that when our stock wasn't working. It was a privately traded company. So those donations over a period of years became the corpus of our future generations' wealth as a family. So that's just a little succession planning, or I should say financial planning for your family. So do it now when it's not worth much, and it will have that growth factor for your family. So
I have a couple more questions for you. Okay. If you were to meet the 21-year-old Mike Cunningham, what advice would you give him about his future?
I think this is a tough one. I mean, the advice would be spend a lot more time with your kids. I was selling printing in the day, and then I was working production at night. They used to call me the hefty man, and then I had a green garbage bag in by my sink in my office, and I used to take showers in that green hefty bag and then change at the office and go. So in the early years, I wasn't there a lot for my kids. But the plus side was when I was 40, I retired. So when my kids were in middle school, I became their coach, and I spent a lot of time. So from middle school on, I was with the kids every day, probably more than they wanted. But in the early years, I wasn't there. So, quality of life is important too. And again, if I would have learned sooner to empower people instead of doing everything myself in the early days, I would have had more family time too, and I would have had a more successful business.
Well, with you now in your second act, I mean, you've been chancellor at National University System. This is going on 6 years, 7 years. All right. So how do you do it all? What type of things do you do with regards to self-care or create balance?
Well, I'll tell you what, the COVID thing's changed. I mean, I have a great gym in my basement now. I mean, it's like, so, and I live in Cardiff, so I have that beachfront lifestyle, and I try to eat healthy, and have a lot of Zoom meetings. I need new glasses. I've been Zooming like crazy. So
wow.
Well, no, it's exciting. As you know, we just launched our big growth strategy, and I'm happy to say, Kim, I live off the coast, and the train's right here, and I just saw the coaster with National University all over it going down the coast. So
that had to be a nice release. So last thing, what message would you like to share with our audience that we may not have covered in the interview?
I think the main thing, and I touched on it a little bit, I think it's not about the exit right now. I mean, it's nice to think about an exit, but when we talk about exit in entrepreneurial companies, the exit is for the investors. They want to know what their exit is, not your exit. So if you're in it to win it, and you have your equity in the game, and you're willing to roll the dice, and you believe in that company and do whatever it takes, as long as it's moral and ethical, and doing it for the right reasons, that's important. When I used to teach entrepreneurship and business plans at San Diego State and at NYU, I mean, the first thing a lot of the kids would say is like, I want to be in this just for 2 years and make a ton of money and leave and do something else and else and else. And believe me, it will come if you just put the time in, and you're in it for the long term, and you'd be surprised what opportunities come that will give you an exit opportunity that you never even thought about. So That's my
Thanks
advice.
so much for sharing that advice. It's so amazing how so many people think in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
But sharing your journey, you were, running CGII for 21 years by the time you exited,
Yeah.
or something to that
Yeah.
effect. And, but it was a great success for you. And then you leveraged that to, with the academic leadership and a couple organizations. So thank you so much, Dr. Cunningham. Really appreciate your
Thank you,
sharing your
guys.
advice with us and our audience. And I'm going to ask our audience, we've got a poll that we're going to share with you to give us feedback about. And while that's coming up on screen, I want to share with you that we've got our webinar coming up in next week, which will be The Power of Picking the Right Investor. That will be on August the 27th at 10 a.m. Will be another engaging conversation. We invite you to visit our website at foundersfirstcdc.org to learn more information. And if you would like to thank you again, thank you, Dr. Cunningham, for spending your evening with us. And thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll be in touch soon. All right.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.